three wedge.
It's interesting how you can sort of one day could just swing, especially if they're kids. Yeah, you can't just that he's at.
Morning, everyone. Morning. Welcome to the Capstone Presentations of the History and Political Studies major and the Self-Design major. These students have spent a number of months envisioning, designing, and completing some really cool projects. So you're in for a treat. The way that our Capstone Presentations work is that each one will get up and kind of give the highlights of their project. Then the real fun begins. We'll bring them up together as a group and we'll go for some Q&A. Sound good? Sounds good, right? Thank you again for coming.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out to our capstone presentations today. My name is Richard Kenyon, and I'm very pleased to present my capstone project. My capstone project was really the culmination of multiple years of research, both in my private life, my professional life, and academic work here at Colby-Sawyer College. Now, it's on the early developments of uniforms inside the British Army during the 18th century, and focuses primarily on the conflict between fashionability and practicality in the development of unique military fashions outside of the civilian world. Now, much of this research was made possible with my work at Fort Ticonderoga in New York, my work with the team of tailors there as part of our living history programming, to actually recreate a lot of this clothing for our daily living history events at the fort. We're open to the public all summer, representing the history of that fort, primarily 1750s and 70s during the French Indian War, the 7 Years' War. Now, my capstone itself focused primarily on the origins of the uniformization of the Army, starting in the 1640s with the English Civil War. Now, that is when the first actual standing army was developed in Britain, rather than simply using militias or mercenaries or anything of that sort. It's also where the origin of the red-colored uniforms begins. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions and things, and certainly working in the field of living history, I hear a lot of people coming in and asking why it was red. It was to hide blood, all of these things. Well, in truth, part of the practicality of uniforming so many people was cheap dye. Now, much of the early visual documentation of the British Army is thanks to William Augustus, the Duke of Cumberland, son of George II, who in the 1740s and 50s commissioned a series of paintings of all of the soldiers in the British Army, and is a great resource today to understand what soldiers were wearing in this time period, particularly around 1751, when a new royal clothing warrant was issued in order to standardize the dress of the British Army. Now, a Swiss painter named David Morier was commissioned by the Duke of Cumberland in 1751 to paint the uniforms of all of the grenadiers inside the British Army to showcase that new royal clothing. Now, these demonstrate very well the civilian suit of clothing at the time, which military uniforms were based off of. Soldiers wore a pair of red wool breeches ended just below the knee, which were supplemented by a pair of tall white linen gaiters held together below the knee with a black leather garter. Then wore a red wool waistcoat lined and trimmed in a woolen lace, very much a military addition. They then wore long wool coats with very full skirts, wide cuffs, and broad lapels that could be buttoned over in inclement weather. Many of these were very much military additions to the clothing, which marked these men out as soldiers. One of the most defining features of this, particularly of these men in the Grenadier Company, instead of wearing the ubiquitous three-pointed cocked hat of the time period, they wear a tall, wool embroidered grenadier cap. Now, in the French and Indian War, many of these aspects of uniforms in the British Army struggled during the wilderness campaigns in North America, and many adaptations had to be made. You can see here myself and others from Fort Ticonderoga recreating some of these uniform alterations that happened during campaigns like those against Ticonderoga in 1758 and 1759. The tall linen gaiters were replaced with these green wool indigenous style leggings that could be more easily produced and simply pulled over the leg. That three-pointed cocked hat was cut down to a significantly less fashionable, simple round hat, which not only was more practical in an environment like North America, but also helped these British regular soldiers to be closer uniformed with the American provincial troops that they served with. Now, the long skirts of the coats were cut down to be short, so that the soldier had to carry less weight while on campaign. Now, there was a new royal clothing warrant issued in 1768, but many of those lessons of practicality learned during the French and Indian War were not forgotten. Despite the changing fashions, this was still an issue, making sure that soldiers had practical clothing no matter where they were. Now, we can see here, recreated men of the 26th Regiment of Foot from the three different companies. Those of the battalion companies we imagine when we think of British soldiers during the American Revolution. The tall men of the Grenadier companies, the most veteran soldiers of the regiment, who wear, by this point in 1768, a tall cap of bearskin, and, that's me right there, the shortest men in any regiment, the men of the light infantry, which is an alteration to all of the regiments in the British Army, that they were to have one company of men trained for skirmishing and wilderness fighting, very much a development of the French and Indian War. They were uniformed, just like they had been during that conflict, with short coats and small caps. Now, in the British Army, these soldiers were also expected to have a different set of clothing to wear while working in, which one of my favorite things I've ever worn. Just a very nice jacket to work in all day. And those lapels on the coat can be buttoned over in inclement weather. Now, I myself have made a lot of this clothing based off of my personal research and being able to look at original garments inside the Fort Ticonderoga collection. That inspired much of my writing during my capstone project. If you'd like to see more about these uniforms, I would recommend particularly checking out this video right here, where I last summer made a coat for a soldier of the British Royal Regiment of Artillery. And I would recommend you check out all the other videos on the Fort Ticonderoga YouTube channel as well. And I would also like to say, thank you very much. A lot of work went into this project, years of personal research, and a lot of help from the people here at Colby-Sawyer College. So thank you all very much.
Good morning. One of the many aspects of teaching history is to make it accessible. Relaying historical information accurately is vital, but the ability to relay such information in a way that is understandable and meaningful allows someone to have a deeper respect and appreciation for history. My name is Declan Lister, and for my capstone project, I created a historical simulation about the Oregon Treaty of 1846 entitled The Desire of Nations, Westward Expansion, Presidential Power, and Foreign Relations in the United States. A historical simulation is an interactive learning experience that places students in a specific moment in history. Instead of reading events in a textbook, students are given historic roles, whether they are politicians, journalists, or independent activists. Their objective is to use primary documents, scholarly sources, and ideas from the time period to attempt to persuade others to achieve their goals. Each student is given a role sheet with different backgrounds in order to formulate their argument and debate with their peers. Simulations allow students not only recreate historic moments, but to understand people's motivations and actions on a personal level and present them in a low-stakes environment. The simulation that I created covered the history of the Oregon Territory from the 1770s up until the signing of the treaty in 1846. The simulation itself begins in 1845 with the inauguration of the 11th President of the United States, James K. Polk. Until this point, the region had been jointly occupied by the United States and Great Britain. During the time the simulation is set, both nations had an increased desire to come to a permanent resolution in a diplomatic manner. Through the simulation, students will be placed in historic roles with their own objectives and be tasked with navigating the issues of territorial boundaries and the rights of the Oregon country. This area of history explores the expansion of empires through territorial gain and trade, as well as the balance between the importance of history and geopolitics. The simulation was designed for a high school class in mind. The gamebook begins with setting the scene for students about the Oregon question and the desire for a resolution. It transitions to a historical background that traces the significance of the British and American discoveries and agreements through the latter 18th century. It covers important moments for the region, such as the Nootka Sound Convention in the 1790s, as well as the subsequent debates and treaties signed in 1818 and 1827. This is recounted in a short, succinct manner in order to allow a high school class to gather the necessary information they need to understand the history while not being overwhelmed. Their anxieties can also be remedied by reading through the simulation advice. As a student who has participated in many simulations during my time here at Colby-Sawyer, I created this section to give advice to students who may have never done simulation before. I also included interviews from instructors that I have here at Colby-Sawyer that have incorporated simulations in their classroom to give advice to both students and instructors on how to participate and run a simulation. The rest of the gamebook entails rules and procedures for the simulation, where students and instructors can find the structure and sources they need to simulate the debates of the treaty. Student roles include many historical figures such as James K. Polk, James Buchanan, John C. Calhoun, Sir Robert Peel, and others that will be reading and interpreting primary documents such as the Treaty of 1818 and the inaugural speech of James K. Polk. Students will make their own decisions, whether they be historical or not, thus requiring the instructor to give the factual, historical information once the simulation is concluded. Running the simulation was not for the sole factor of how intriguing this part of history is. Part of my education here at Colby-Sawyer was studying to become a teacher. My desire is to teach high school history, but to move on to the collegiate level. I wanted to create something that blended my love for history and politics as well as education. From an educational standpoint, simulations are a great method to learn any subject, especially history. It does not rely on instructors to lead a class in a lecture that will be later recited by students on an exam. Simulations combat passive learning and allow students to have agency in their learning and become active participants in the classroom. Simulations are simply not about learning history. While students are learning about the history of foreign relations and governmental power between the United States and Great Britain through the Oregon Treaty, they are practicing and honing skills that will be transferable to any career path they choose. During the course of my simulation, students will be tasked with interpreting primary documents, incorporating sources, writing and debating argumentative essays, and presenting their work to their peers. These skills are important to learn for job interviews, presentation at jobs, or presenting your capstone thesis. Simulations also allow for students to retain the historical information better because they have a stake in the game. I chose to write on this topic because I've always had a love for the American West. Growing up, I watched many Western movies from the 1950s and adventure movies, such as Indiana Jones, with my grandfathers and my father and mother that gave me the love I have for both history and the American West. The reason I want to be an educator is to share this love with others. Even if students still don't absolutely love the history, my hope is that they walk away with a deeper appreciation and enjoy the participation that simulation requires. This project has been difficult but satisfying to create and is not a stagnant entity. As I continue my educational journey, my simulation will continue to grow and morph as I do the same. Finally, I would just like to thank Dean Hansen, Professor Boyer, Professor Gallagher, and my capstone peers for their contributions and guidance through my project, as well as a special thank you to my loved ones for their continuous support. And thank you all for listening.
Morning, everyone. Morning. Before we begin, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank you all for being here. It really means a lot to see such a full room going probably a little too far back, all the way back there. But really, it means a lot to all of us to be in Hanson that so many people care enough about what we're talking about, what our projects were, to come and watch us today. So thank you. My name is Tobias Patterson, and I'm really excited to share with you all today my capstone presentation. AI is not new. Since the 1950s, artificial intelligence has been the avenue of exploration for many individuals and groups. In the 50s, at the labs of NASA, where automated computer systems were created to help track rocket launch trajectory. This saved valuable hours needed in the early stages of space travel. Moving ahead to the 70s, at the hallowed halls of MIT, where Eliza, the first chatbot, was made. Its sole purpose was to simulate a therapy session for MIT students. In the 90s, IBM's Deep Blue, a chess-playing robot, played against the world's #1 chess player, human chess player that is, in a match, first to 6 games won. First time they met, Deep Blue only won one of these games. However, after a year of development and coding, not only did Deep Blue win the rematch, first to 6 games, but in a single game, they won in just 19 moves. A rapid development. In the 2000s and 2010s, we see the shift of AI into many of our everyday lives with Siri, Alexa, Google Home, etc. These are personal assistant bots who have natural language processing systems, which means they can turn written or spoken comments, questions, concerns into full-blown conversations. AI is not new. But then again, AI is not what it used to be. No longer is it slowly growing in the background, only in the hands of the most elite groups, individuals, and organizations. Instead, it's dominating. It's dominating our news cycles, it's dominating our schools, dominating our social media, and perhaps most intriguingly, it's dominating our courtrooms as we speak. As generative AI becomes more and more human-like at an alarming rate, courts are racing to answer the questions: what is creation? Who can be a creator? And who's responsible for AI's generation? For my topic, I wanted to focus on my biggest passion in life, which is the law. More in particular, I wanted to reform intellectual property law because of the advancements in artificial intelligence. Early in the first semester, Dean Hanson and I discussed potentially doing a documentary as an avenue to explore this topic. I said yes. I think that's a great idea. It allows me to give historical context, legal precedent, and then also integrate my own legal reform into one cohesive and creative piece. So, instead of showing you all an hour-long documentary with my silky smooth Morgan Freeman voice, and I'm sure we'll probably put you all to sleep, I won't be doing that. Instead, I'll just be showing you about a 6-minute clip so you get an idea. It's a condensed version, so I hit on all the key points, but I won't waste too much of your time. So without further ado, and then I'll talk. Yeah. Everybody here okay?
For most of modern legal history, creativity has been tied to a single assumption: that an identifiable human mind stands behind every protected work. Artificial intelligence disrupts that assumption, does not merely assist human expression, It can generate expression independently. Music, writing, visual art, film, produced instantly at the touch of a button and on mass scale. The law does not deny that these outputs exist. What it denies is that a machine can be held responsible for them. In Vice, the Supreme Court set the standard for copyright protection. A work must be original, meaning independently made and minimally creative. The court also held that raw facts are not protected. Implied in that ruling is a core assumption that originality comes from a human author. In Naruto v. Slater, a monkey took a photograph using a wildlife photographer's camera. The question was whether that image could receive copyright protection. The court said no, because copyright law only recognizes human authors. In 2023, the Copyright Office applied that rule to artificial intelligence. In reviewing an AI-generated comic, it granted protection only to the human-created portions. The AI-generated images themselves were denied protection. Patent law follows the same principle. In Fowler v. Vidal, an AI system was listed as the inventor on a patent application. The court rejected it, holding that only a natural person can be an inventor. Now, the conflict shifts to training data. In the New York Times versus OpenAI, the issue is whether AI systems unlawfully use copyrighted material to train their models. This creates a gap. The system produces the output, but cannot be held liable. The humans who can be held liable did not directly create it.
That ain't Anyone know what time we're at? We'll get there. You might not get there.
We might not get there. You want me to come up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
IT man.
I think it's up here, so let me figure it out.
It's not we can see. You should.
Yeah, try to escape live.
Try to change that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Here we go.
Oh, that.
Just
go to like. Yeah.
You got. Okay, I'll let you do that.
Back with this, everybody. All right, so we got the monkey. All right. Oh, come on, man. Where did it go?
Naruto v. Slater, a monkey took a photograph
We're gonna rewind it.
of a wildlife photographer's camera. The question was whether that image could receive copyright protection. The court said no, because copyright law only recognizes human authors. In 2023, the Copyright Office applied that rule to artificial intelligence. In reviewing an AI-generated comic, it granted protection only to the human-created portions. The AI-generated images themselves were denied protection. Patent law follows the same principle. In Fowler v. Vidal, an AI system was listed as the inventor on a patent application. The court rejected it, holding that only a natural person could be an inventor. Now, the conflict shifts to training data. In the New York Times versus OpenAI, the issue is whether AI systems unlawfully use copyrighted material to train their models. This creates a gap. The system produces the output, but cannot be held liable. The humans who can be held liable did not directly create it. The solution is not to it is to assign responsibility correctly. Responsibility must follow. Courts can ask 3 questions. Who controlled the system? Was the harm foreseeable? And who could have prevented it? If a user or operator intentionally causes harm, they are responsible. If outputs become predictable, responsibility shifts to the platform. If the system itself creates risk, responsibility attaches at the design level. Implementing this framework requires structural changes, greater transparency in training data and system design, licensing regimens that clarify permissible use of copyrighted material, limited protections for AI-generated outputs tied to meaningful human contribution, and clearly defined liability standards that align with control. The issue is not whether risk exists, it is how the law assigns that risk among responsible actors. If the law does nothing, it does not preserve the system. It erodes it. Creativity becomes either unprotected, meaning absorbed into datasets and replicated without limit, or controlled, defined by those who own the systems that generate it. In both cases, the same principle disappears: accountability. And without accountability, there is no meaningful ownership, only output, only scale, and no one left to answer for the consequences. The question was never just who creates. It was always who answers for what is created.
Harsh.
No.
Wait for it. There it is. Thank you all for bearing through that with me. So to reiterate, this is the core of MARD. How responsibility should actually be assigned when AI is involved. Instead of asking who created something, I'm asking a different question. Who had control over the outcome? Developers. These are the people building the systems itself. They decide what data goes into it, how it learns, and what safeguards are put into place. So if something goes wrong because of how the system itself was designed, like it was trained on copyrighted material in OpenAI versus New York Times, or released without the proper filters, responsibility can start at this level. Platform. These are the companies actually releasing and managing the AI itself, so they control how it's used at scale. If the system is repeatedly producing harmful or illegal outputs, and the company knows about it but doesn't do anything to fix it, then responsibility shifts to them. Operators or users. AI is still just a tool, like a keyboard or a camera. So if someone uses it to do something intentionally wrong, like plagiarism, fraud, defamation, etc., then they're responsible for that choice. The key idea here is that responsibility doesn't just sit in one place. It depends on who has most control over the process at any given time. And sometimes, multiple layers can share responsibility at the same time. And so instead of forcing AI into all legal categories and frameworks, this model shifts the focus to control what is controllable for our actual system. And that's what makes it workable within our system right now. AI isn't the problem. Lack of accountability. The law doesn't need to give machines rights or copyright protections. It needs to make sure humans remain responsible for their actions, both in development and operating phases. A system where no one is responsible is not neutral. It is a system where power operates without accountability. And without accountability, there can be no just laws. A couple thank yous. Firstly, my fellow scholars, my peers, for their peer editing and help along the way. Dean Hansen for helping me channel my inner Ken Burns. On a more serious note, thank you for keeping me on track and picking me up whenever I felt down in the process. Dr. B. Wally Morgan, my, what's it called? What class? Yeah, public speaking class. Thank you, Dr. B. She's probably cursing me right now for not. Listen, I came in early, right? I did the video, you can't blame me for that. Anyways, all of you for your time and attention. It really means a lot to all of us. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Sawicki, and I did my project on religion and politics within the United States and the relationship it has with our current administration. This research is especially interesting to me because I was raised very religious. My father is a pastor, and I went to a private Christian school up until the 4th grade. I have since left the faith senior year of high school, but never lost the interest of religion itself. It can be useful and can create legitimacy within communities and within entire nations. It can help create a moral foundation and build important relationships. I also gained an interest in history and political studies as I grew up. So I thought, why not mix the two and research one of the most controversial administrations in modern American presidencies? It is not unusual for people in power to utilize religion to gain power or to mobilize voters. Presidents like Jimmy Carter, George W. Bush, Joe Biden, and many others have used religious rhetoric to pass legislation or to legitimize political motives. However, the way President Trump has been utilizing religion is much different. Donald Trump uses a strategy called populism. It is defined as a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. He has made clear lines of who his in-group is and who his out-group is. The religious community has felt that they are losing power within the United States government over the years. and President Trump has promised to regain that power. He has successfully achieved this by overturning court cases like Angel v. Vital, which removed state-led prayer in public schools, and Roe v. Wade, which provided state-sanctioning abortion. These were issues that the religious right had been striving for in the past. He proudly wears these achievements on his chest and has accomplished other legislation that the religious right has wanted. These being restrictions on LGBTQ+ rights, immigration, judicial appointments, religious liberty initiatives, and many other policy outcomes. The president has utilized religion and has even claimed to be religious himself. He is shown holding Bibles, attending religious services, and even selling his own Trump Bible. However, his attitudes and his rhetoric do not follow traditional religious frameworks. He has consistently pushed violent and divisive rhetoric even before his political career. Rhetoric is defined as the art, study, or technique of using language effectively and persuasively in spoken or written discourse. Donald Trump excels at this strategy and knows how to pull his voters in and keep their support despite being very controversial. Maggie Haberman is a journalist who exclusively studies Donald Trump and religion and politics. She explains in her book, Confidence Man, that the president learned early in his career that the perception of success was far more important than actual success. This allows him to build a powerful public persona that resonated with audiences seeking decisive leadership. This approach translated effectively into his political career. This is what makes Donald Trump a very effective politician, but one that is murky and comes with many negatives. When using divisive rhetoric, it causes lots of political polarization. Political polarization has gotten far worse in our country, and it keeps people from discussing politics with the other side. Politics is all about compromising and finding solutions. The polarization has gotten so bad that there is no compromise anymore, but instead people who are cemented in their own ideologies. This has led many religious organizations to choose a political side when they shouldn't have to. Religion can be a standalone entity without being muddied by politics. However, this is becoming increasingly more difficult. With the rise of the internet, we have seen presidents start to utilize social media to voice their opinions and to quickly release information that they feel the American public should know. Donald Trump has the most social media presence out of any president. He has consistently posted on Instagram, X, Truth Social, and many other platforms. However, instead of utilizing social media to spread information or to notify the public, he uses it as his own personal boxing ring. He constantly posts about his opponents and says exactly what he's thinking about them. He also uses these platforms to talk down about the Hispanic community, the Black community, immigrants, the LGBTQ+ community, and many other minority groups. When rhetoric like this is being used regularly by those in power, it can trickle down into common society. As somebody who strives to be an effective educator in the future, I know how important it is to be a role model for the younger generation. After Donald Trump's victory, teachers reported that students used the terms deportation and wall more often than other words when they were taunting their Latino peers and other students of minority groups. There was also an increase in bullying cases all throughout the nation. Following his victory, 41% of Latinos in the United States told pollsters that they were concerned about their place within America. These minority groups are also predominantly religious, and therefore shines a negative light on how Donald Trump handles religious people who oppose him. This is neither beneficial for the younger generation and is also tainting the image of religious groups that affiliate with the president as well. Alongside writing my paper, I conducted 4 interviews. One with my father, Frank Sawicki, who is a pastor at our church. An interview with Professor Eric Boyer, who is our politics professor here on campus. An interview with local pastor and campus safety officer here, Willie Bacote. And an interview with Nancy Richardson, who has a PhD in research psych and an alumni at Colby-Sawyer College. All of them brought a great perspective to the conversation about religion and politics. I felt that all of the scholarly research that I had done was not enough for my topic. This type of situation does not just affect politicians, the rich, or those in power, but people like you and I. So I wanted to hear the perspectives of average people who have an interest in either politics or religion. These interviews gave me a better look about how this administration is affecting churches, local government, and average people. So I would like to thank my interviewees for allowing me to talk with them and use their ideas for my capstone. The religious right felt that they were losing a seat at the table of the United States government, that they were losing the power they once held within the nation. President Trump has not just offered them a seat, but the whole table. They are willing to look past his inconsistencies of his relationship with religion to achieve their political motives. So far, this strategy has worked. We are currently witnessing a pressing time in our nation's history. Our democracy is at stake, and we as a people need to understand the significance of the time that we are living right now. Religion is not a tool, but a part of culture and a way of life. Once people start to abuse it, it can lose its significance and its meaning. Although I am no longer religious, I understand its importance and the need for it to be protected at all costs. Donald Trump is claiming to be the protector of religion, but he's not protecting religion, but instead utilizing it for his own personal gain. I hope that in the near future, we can repair the damage that has been done and move forward as a nation and not move backwards. I'd like to give a special thank you to my family, to Dean Randy Hansen, and to my peers and my friends. Thank you very much.
Within the world we live in, creativity is everywhere. Though many might not consider themselves able to be creative or lacking the talent, there is a level of inventiveness amidst every human being. However, such artistry does not come without inspiration. It is the basis from which all forms of expressiveness that we as humans portray. Without a source to pull from, ideas often feel flat or unimaginative. Within the context of the musical world especially, composing a piece requires some prior knowledge of how music works and what tools to use. Throughout the last 150 years, said tools have advanced dramatically, allowing for a plethora of styles, genres, and instruments to be created and utilized in a myriad of wonderful ways. My name is Tristan Williams, and I decided to use this capstone as a self-designed artistic and historical studies major to explore the ever-evolving technology present in the music industry. As a so-called bedroom producer, I thoroughly enjoy composing and arranging musical pieces on my own, most of the time in my bedroom. While I tend to focus on electronic dance music as well as some ambient pieces, I wanted to research this the last century and a half and how the music industry has grown technologically as a way of deepening my understanding of past and present day concepts. In my paper, I talk about major breakthroughs in the world of recording, as well as a discussion on computers and digital audio workstations, going over their effects on the music industry, as well as how genres were popularized as a result of more widespread access to musical equipment. Additionally, with some of the more up-to-date technologies that are being released even today, there is admittedly very little that has been written about said hardware. So while I did research and rank using professional papers as my primary sources, I also intertwined small articles I found online, as well as video essays and music guides, as they allowed me to broaden the overview of what I wanted to discuss. This was the biggest reason I wanted to write on this topic, as a way to consolidate this information into a scholarly manner and properly write out a summary of its overview and history, both in terms of record label status, as well as discussing the ever-growing underground scene. As I wrote this paper, I took some time to listen to a collection of songs that one might have heard given the era of music. In doing so, I devised my own understanding of past artists' musical talent and practiced creating pieces that were synonymous with the times. From the late 1880s into the early 20th century, Thomas Edison's phonograph and Emil Berlinger's gramophone were released into the public. In doing so, genres such as jazz, big band, and ragtime became staples in the music industry, growing in popularity as record discs became more readily available to the public. What I've created was inspired heavily by the piano-driven ragtime at the turn of the century, blending a few dissonant and chromatic elements into my production to hint at some of the jazzy ideas that were similarly beginning to show up at the time. So without further ado, I present to you my work. As I wrote this paper, I took some time to listen to a collection of songs that one might have heard, in discussing this part of music's history. I laid out an overview of how recorded music led to the creation of record discs, and subsequently the vinyl record. The ability to play back music without the necessity of an entire band playing live before an audience was revolutionary and sparked all manners of inventiveness. For time's sake, I will be skipping over what many might consider the golden age of music. However, as a brief summary, from the late 1930s to 1960s, jazz and big band both had heavy influence on the creation of rock and roll as well as blues, two genres that may not have existed without the widespread popularity of recorded music. Jumping to a period in which vinyl records, radio stations, and disc jockeys or DJs exploded in popularity, we find ourselves in the 1970s, where genres such as disco, funk, and hip-hop begin to emerge. Turntablism and sampling became an integral part of mainstream and underground music, and are what inspired the lo-fi aesthetic of this next piece. Its chopped drum samples and smooth trumpet are in collaboration with a friend of mine, utilizing my musical knowledge with his slam poetry-esque lyrics featuring the 1970s and 1980s R&B vibe.
I'm not a professional, so that's why I tell them all about it. Papa leave me surprised, the heart attack gonna be terminal. Not trying to fake it to make it, if it don't have what I'm saying, it's safe to keep it as best as I possibly can. Waiting for that label to give me a deal, but I gotta go, so I'm trying to I wanna impact the new generation with my music that will play every radio station while keeping fruit up on the plane, trying to navigate my fate. Yeah, I'm making sure my life is secure, but it gets harder with the pain I endure. Looking for a way through this endless grief, while figuring out what your purpose will be for now.
Admittedly, this song is unfinished, so while the lyrics have been written out to completion, the recording has yet to take place. The remainder of this song I do still wish to showcase, as I'm incredibly proud of the production. It took me many hours to make this. And additionally, I simply wish to portray it as a display of my learning. So, let's take a listen. The inclusion of computers in the music industry throughout the 1990s and early 2000s also led to the invention of digital audio workstations, allowing for music to be created without the necessity of live instruments. Wavetable synthesizers were introduced to the music industry around this time too, allowing sound engineers to design whatever noise they wanted, giving way to the idea of sound design as a whole. This electronically produced noise led its way into the music scene. With it, electronic dance music was born. relevant to EDM. I practiced sampling with this snippet both in designing some vocal chops, as well as using a recording of my friend, in which a can of an energy drink decompressed due to pressure in the back of his car, letting off a crunchy metallic sound that I implemented into this piece of snare hit. It's this ability to properly work in all kinds of sounds into a musical piece that I feel captures just how far we've come with the technologies we have in our modern day. Among them, electro swing, a genre blending 1920s and 1930s jazz instrumentation with later EDM drum loops and sound design, as well as orchestral ambience, which combines live orchestras and synthesizers, as well as digital technologies. Video games, the internet, social media, even meme culture have all had influences on the music industry within recent decades. Genres including chiptune, hyperpop, funk, mashup music are all respectively products of each mentioned outlet and continue to influence subgenres to this day. The internet has similarly made streaming services available, in turn making music further accessible beyond CDs. As digital, computerized files, namely the MP3 file and WAV file, which I used here, allow anyone with an electronic device to listen whenever and wherever they want, no longer necessitating multiple moving parts in order to listen to the ever-growing musical library. AI has also made its way into the music industry, as AI music has seen some success, albeit plenty of backlash, across the digital soundscape. It is these ever-changing technologies, as well as a plethora of innovations, including microphone technologies, speaker systems, cassette tapes, auxiliary and XLR cables, that have all allowed for a beautiful combination of styles across the world, leaving our ever-changing musical world with an unlimited number of ideas to work off. As the industry continues to grow and new artists show their faces across the globe, I will be forever in anticipation to see what comes next and what myself and many others will create as new inspirations continue to push innovations. And so with that, I leave you with my citations and a special thanks to Franco Barioli, a friend of mine who did the lyrics on the hip-hop segment, and Caden Taylor for his decompressing can, as well as the final presentation amongst this group of incredible students. I would like to formally thank you all for coming out to these wonderful presentations and direct an additional proper thank you to Randy Hansen, yet again, I know it's redundant, but in assisting our writing, our research, and our presentations, and for sticking with us this entire semester. Thank you, Randy.
Well, they stood up, so we give them one more round of applause. Right, ready for some questions and answers? Who'd like to start? Okay, in the back.
I have a question for Tobias.
Yes.
Does your three-layered framework for the framework or the legalness of AI, does that apply just to created images and videos, or does that apply to like anything that's outputted in the AI system, like words and text and stuff like that?
So that's applying to anything that could be under the umbrella of copyright, trademark, patent, and intellectual property. So that could be music, that could be text, that could be like a written page, it could be images, it can be anything that essentially could obtain protection. Thank you for your question.
Mr. Boyer.
Andrew, good question for you. So is there room for a left wing kind of religion? Like, so I can see great project. I can see going in two directions. One would be get religion out, which there's a bit of segment of Americans trying to do that for a long time. I don't think it's ever going to happen. Is there a space for a kind of left-wing religiosity that could kind of use the ideas and identity in a different way than Donald Trump is using?
Yes, I think it's a senator in Texas.
Yes, Tallarico is the
yes.
is that
He's very religious, and he's very open about his religion, but he does not let it affect his policy outcomes. And every time that I've seen him speak in interviews and stuff like that, they try to get him a gotcha question for his religious views and his political views, and how they kind of clash together.
Yeah.
But he is very good at separating the two and trying to see what his people want in his state and not about his personal views. And so I feel like that is part of the issue with politics, is that a lot of times you get politicians who want personal gain or utilize any type of avenue, whether it's religion or anything else, to gain more of a personal advantage. And I think that using religion as that personal advantage is very dangerous. And there is a way to utilize religion in a certain way that can be positive, but that's not what we're seeing right now with this administration. But I do think that it is possible to utilize religion in a positive way, but you have to toe that line. So it's a very complicated relationship. Thank you.
Thanks, gents, all of you, wonderful. I have, I think, a similar question for Declan and Ricky. It kind of applies in different ways. So you both presented a version of studying history that is non-traditional, right? Ricky, your focus is on material culture, the physical thing, and making it and developing it. And Declan, yours obviously is more pedagogical, about teaching and learning in the simulation model. I'm wondering if you can both talk a little bit about what you think the kind of advantage of this alternative approach is. So in Ricky's case, what do you think you get from studying the physical material of history versus, say, hearing about it in a lecture? And Declan, for your point of view, can you talk about like what the overall sort of takeaway for the student is for doing a simulation-based learning? What's the big questions they're dealing with in your scenario beyond simply a traditional history class? Thank you both.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of living history and very physical, material history, I think it's a way that helps people who are getting engaged with this to look more at the fact that when you're dealing with history, you're dealing with human beings, real human beings. I think when you look at a coat or when you put it on, you can understand a person better than reading about it in a book. And I think a lot of conversations of clothing are very applicable today. It's something that's very intimate, very personal to people. And I think a lot of that is lost when you study, politics and very grand events and warfare and political machinations. I think you forget about all of this is happening at the ground level and looking at what people are wearing every single day, tools they're using. I think that it helps get to that core of the fact that it's all human beings.
And I think a very similar answer to what Ricky said is that when you're in the classroom, just doing a lecture and writing an exam, you lose that sort of perspective. You're able to read about that perspective, but when you're assigned a role, you are totally disconnected from, because we could be learning about the Chinese Empire, or one of the Chinese empires, and you have no connection to these people, and you have to separate yourself and just, you're that person now. And once you walk away from the simulation, you gain that perspective. And through your conversation with your peers, you gain the perspective of others that you otherwise wouldn't get reading a textbook or having a discussion through your teaching. And I think it's a way for students to learn from each other and to learn more about themselves and realize that I'm not so disconnected from the people that I'm representing, and that the life they lived however many years ago is not so dissimilar to mine. So I think overall you just gain more of a perspective about other people throughout history and that you can relate to.
First of all, I want to say I'm really proud of all of you guys for coming up here and presenting. So congrats. I have a question for you, Tristan. So I know you quickly touched upon it, but how do you think AI can be integrated into the music industry? Of course, AI is being integrated to everything in music. There's a lot of music websites and programs to make a lot of these musics. But what do you think? Can you see what a future where AI can be accepted and integrated into the music industry?
Personally, I don't like the idea of it. However, I think that there are tools in which AI, there are AI tools in music already as well, not just AI music in general. Of course, there is AI music as a whole. You can just ask it to generate a song and it will do that for you. Which, I will admit, it is very impressive. However, I, as a person who creates music, prefer to see that people are doing it because I prefer to make music so that, just because I enjoy it. And whether people enjoy it or not afterwards is just a product of if I made it well or not, I guess. And I wouldn't say that AI necessarily has that same connection to an audience. I prefer to listen to music that I know has a reason behind it, or a story to tell, or there's a level of humanality I enjoy in music. And so in terms of the entire industry, I'm sure it'll make its way into our modern lives more than it already is, because it's just going to be easily replicatable, and it's just going to make money, really, because it's going to be so easily fooled, tied into other human products that it'll make its way, I'm sure. But I think in terms of tools within the musical industry, it's difficult to say, because there's definitely some implementations in which it could be helpful in terms of splicing audio so that you can separate the vocals from an actual track. And sure, in that case, I'm still very iffy on it myself, but yeah, I think there is a world in which it makes its way into our industry very rapidly.
For Ricky, by the way, you all did incredible. Where did you start your love for fashion and clothing and sewing and all that stuff?
I had a friend when I was very young, still a very dear friend of mine, who was always very into history. When we were very little, it irritated me to no end. Until I realized, wait, this is actually kind of interesting. And we both really got into sort of that material, fashion, history of clothing, material culture of all varieties. And we ended up, he went to a sewing workshop at Fort Ticonderoga to make an 18th century coat. And he did not know how to sew at all. And something had messed up in the website, so they actually didn't know that he had registered for the class. So he showed up, and they were totally unprepared to teach this guy how to sew. But he soldiered through it. And eventually I started volunteering there, and I got involved with the costuming department. Really great team of tailors there, super knowledgeable about clothing in the time period. And I really have been fortunate enough, while involved with the costuming department at Ticonderoga, to actually be able to look at a lot of original garments. A lot of the work I've done recreating things. The big project I worked on last summer was a coat for a 1770s Royal Artillery coat. But a lot of the details on that were based off of a coat in the Ticonderoga collections, which is the oldest surviving American military coat. And I've actually gotten to handle it and look at it, examine all the details. And so it's been a long journey, but I'm really fortunate for the place I am and the things I've got to see and recreate. I think it's been a lot of fun, and I think my experiences talking with visitors about all of that and teaching people about this has been really fulfilling and really great.
Declan, I have a question for you, my friend. Kind of piggybacking off of what Professor Gallagher said, I want to know specifically why you chose this specific time and location in history. Oregon Treaty, right?
Correct.
Yes. I want to know why you specifically chose that and why you think it's important that people learn about that. And my second part to my question is, when you start teaching, are you going to run that simulation in your classroom?
Well, I'll answer your second question first. Yes, I plan on implementing this. After play testing and working out the kinks and building more on it, I plan on fully implementing it in my classroom. And I think this moment in history is so important because we see moments in history where presidential power is expanded. And I think when we're talking about the history of presidents or just the history of the United States, it all ties into politics. And I think my simulation drives that home in the sense that it's having a discussion about politics while also talking about foreign relations. Because during this time, in a standard history textbook, we're not necessarily talking about foreign relations, especially when we're talking about American history. It's about what happened on this day, and what happened on that day, at what time, and what day. And I think that when talking about this period in history, it's intriguing to see how President Polk expanded power, and because he was witnessing a two-front war with Mexican War, and then with the Oregon dispute, it was a pivotal moment in the United States when we could have had a two-front war, and the geography of the United States could have been drastically different if this issue wasn't solved diplomatically. And I think driving that home in a class is very important, and saying that solving issues diplomatically while also understanding the history of all sides is an important aspect. And I also just chose this topic and chose the Oregon Treaty itself because I find the era fascinating, and I just love it. It was sort of the start of the American West. People were moving prior to 1846, starting in the 1830s, with a huge resurgence in the beginning of the 1840s. And then once we acquired the territory in 1846, there were mass amounts of people who were moving west, which led to sort of a romanticized view that we get in the 1950s. So it was sort of that love that I have for the American West. So I wanted to see the beginning of it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Oh yeah, it does. Thank you very much.
Of course, thank you.
So I was wondering what your filming process was like for your documentary and where you got most of those clips.
Yeah, I don't make movies. I think that was the first time I put clips together since middle school. Yeah, I think it's a little bit better. Yeah, those are all stock images, stock audio. So I went and searched all that. My computer's been bad with the battery life on it, so I've been in the lab and storage center for a while. So I was there for a couple days, and so yeah, I'm just finding. I put my script down. So once I did my long script, which was my entire presentation, I made the condensed version, and so I just did my best to build the shots, what audio I wanted, and then I just did my best to kind of find those on public domain, and then just voice over at the end.
Great job, everybody. Andrew, this is for you. So, seeing the history and what's going on now and in the future, what's the ebb and flow of religion and politics? Because a lot of times we go one extreme and then, they're doing that, go to the other extreme. Is there a middle, and what do you think about a centrist idea for putting morals, because everybody has a religion, and even if they don't believe in religion, they still have a religion. Do they have a moral code that could help politics?
Yeah, so there definitely could potentially be a shift far left. You see that pendulum swing. So we're seeing a far right swing. There could potentially be a far left swing, but that's just as bad, right? You don't want radicalism on either side. And so what you might see in the future is less of a religion in politics, because that might not be what people are looking for, especially during this administration, which is becoming increasingly unpopular on both sides. You might see politicians try to shy away from this rhetoric or this style of politics, or you might see people lean into it. So it could swing either way. It really depends on who our next candidates will be for both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. But we might see a third party form, but that's pretty rare in American politics. You usually see both sides continuing and digging deeper into their own ideologies instead of trying to compromise them together. So hopefully we see more of a shift to the middle and see more compromise within the future, because that's what we need. We don't need people to vote based on party. We need people to vote based on people and what's best for the Constitution, for our country, for our future, foreign relations, diplomacy. All those things should be what we strive for, and not your own political party or your own personal gain. And religion ties into all of that, right? your own personal beliefs, the morals, the foundation. Our country is very much built on a moral foundation based on the Constitution, based on our founding fathers. And so I would hope that we would see more of a shift to the middle, but it's American politics, so.
Thank you.
Ricky, you got me thinking philosophically here, so get ready. So I want to hear your thoughts. What is the importance of a uniform? I keep thinking, when I saw your project, I kept thinking about warfare is kind of moving away from uniformed soldiers fighting each other, and it's more like a war amongst the people, right? Where people, and I keep thinking about my grandfather's World War II uniform and the flag that I was given, and my mom has that in a place of prominence on the mantle. Could you speak a little bit just about the importance of a uniform? Why is a uniform relevant and important and a bearer of symbolic power? Just talk about that, because I'd love to hear about that, because I think we're losing something when we lose this kind of warfare. Yeah.
I think that really that's one of the through lines of researching the development of uniforms, is that importance of the uniform is what distinguishes you as, especially in this time by the 18th century, this is a professional standing army. You are a direct reflection of the government that you are operating under the command of. You're a soldier, you're a tailor from Kent, but you are a representative of George III because you are serving in the military. And if you are walking around in raggedy, unfashionable clothing, it doesn't reflect well on the government that you're serving. That's why you see in these uniforms all of these extra very unnecessary pieces. A tall embroidered cloth cap serves no practical purpose. But it shows what you are, who you are. You are a professional. The grenadiers that we were looking at in those paintings, they wear on the belt that holds the cartridges, there is a match case, which is going back to the times when grenadiers actually threw grenades. They had a little burning match case. They don't do that anymore. 18th century grenades are really dangerous. They don't really use them, but they still have that as a symbol of that status because it is so important. And you really see that in the British Army quite a lot. The British Army is formed in 1707 when the English Army and the Scottish Army are combined, and it exists as one single institution all the way to the modern day. Most of the regiments formed during the 18th century can have their history traced from a modern day regiment all the way back. And I take great pride in that, the British military. And part of that is the uniform. Uniforms worn in the British military today, a lot of those dress uniforms are still just as gaudy as they were in the 18th century. But one of the things that you then see is that clash between you want to be professional, you want to be a respectable fighting force, but you also need to wear something practical. And that's why you see, you're getting to North America during the French and Indian War away from nice European cities and population centers, and they're cutting hats down, they're cutting coats short. As soon as they get back to Europe, full-length coats, nicely decorated hats. And another thing, particularly in the 18th century, is that not only are you a representative of your government, but militaries are generally acting as a police force in the 18th century. You look at illustrations from population centers, cities and towns, you'll almost always see a soldier standing in an archway, by a door, on sentry duty. A lot of that job is then, in the 19th century, taken by formal police forces who are uniformed, just like a military in a lot of ways. And I think one of those important things is that thing, professionalism. I mean, any government position, even today, if you work for the post office, you wear a uniform because it is displaying your status. And I think today a very relevant discussion of that is something like ICE, where how do you support that professionalism when you're walking around in jeans and a tactical vest and a pair of sunglasses? You are not properly representing. You're grabbing people off the street, putting them in a van. That comes across better when you are dressed respectively. Your face is not covered. You are okay. You are happy. You are glad to represent the government that you are working under. And so I think that's one of those really important through lines to today of how is this relevant up to the time that we're living in now, and it's that idea of professionalism.
Can I just follow up really quick? Because I think that's fantastic. And if you ever looking to expand it, I think that's because that's also the way we have accountability, right? Like the government has given you the chance, the authority to kill, so we expect accountability. And I'd love for you to explore something like the way Eisenhower desegregated the military, right? Before there was an attempt to desegregate schools, because of that idea of everyone is made uniform when you walk in with the haircut and the glasses. And I think there's just a wonderful ways to expand this to make those connections to current debates now around insignia and symbols of power. So excellent.
Yeah, and I think working every day, all summer, talking with visitors coming in, trying to really get people to understand the significance of that. Is I've had a lot of visitors who come in who come to conclusions like that on their own as they're thinking about what is the significance of this, why study this, why does this matter.
Oh, I have a question for you guys. So you do touch on the New York Times case, so I'd like you to expand a little. I was curious to know what your take on that case is, and how could we seek accountability under the framework, especially since I think a lot of creators are seeing their creations being used to train without necessarily compensation or agreement. So I'm kind of curious to know what your take on that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, the New York Times case, essentially OpenAI, the people who own ChatGPT, were basically exposed for using copyrighted material in their training models. So that goes back to the developer section of the pre-learned model I was talking about. Yeah, no, it's a huge issue because the scale of these of the training data is massive. Like it's essentially a web browser. It's in the same degree of Google, of all those. So when you go to ChatGPT, there's no really saying if the proper safeguards aren't in place, what is copyright and what's not. I think our framework is essentially the lesser of two evils, because if we take away, if we give too much backlash to developers, to AI companies, they're more likely to not allow public access to it because it creates more risk for them if users aren't using it correctly. However, and these people aren't the ones developing it. So I think it's an interesting question because you don't really know, and no one really knows. And the people who own the actual platform don't know because they're getting developers to do it for them. And so then there's no way for the people using it to know. It creates a lot of gray area. And I think it is concerning for creators in particular. New York Times was particularly upset because they said that they were contributing a lot to journalism, and there was no real word put in OpenAI's point of view in terms of generating the same content that they spent actual effort creating and contributing to the public. So it's a really weird spot because we're just figuring it all out right now, right? Technology develops really fast. The law doesn't. And so while they're trying to go and they're trying to answer these questions, there's more developments. And while these cases are still in the court system, AI is becoming a whole different thing than it was before. And so, to essentially answer your question, if we give accountability to the actual actions, right, it helps at least keep the system intact. Because right now it's breaking because the whole assumption is that creators have to be human, right? And so, right now, at least if we can give responsibility to humans, accountability to humans, there could be some repercussions for some of the actions. Because right now, people are just blaming AI instead of the actual people behind it. And that's really the main point, is that there's people behind this. We can't just blame the system just because it's too big, just because it's too confusing for some people. There actually has to be some sort of accountability, and there's none of that.
One more question, alumni in the back.
Congratulations to all of you. All did amazing.
My question is for Andrew. You might have mentioned this throughout your presentation, but I didn't catch the whole thing. But I just wanted to hear your opinion. Do you think throughout history or even now that politicians use religion because they truly believe and give value for what the religion teach, or because it's a much easier tool to control the people because religion is deeply tied to people's identity? And if you target on people's identity, it's much easier to control your own ulterior motive on what type of policies that you want to pass. So I just wanted to understand what your perspective on that is.
Yeah, I think that overall, there could possibly be some people in power that truly believe the things that they're teaching, the religion of themselves. I don't think that's the case for Donald Trump, however. There's very little evidence to show that he is actually religious and consistently, he was asked about what his favorite Bible verse was, and he said, I don't know. And they said, what's your favorite book, Old or New Testament? And he says equal, right? So that's not really a good answer. But I think that people like Donald Trump and other people in power understand the significance of religion and its role within society and its importance. And so I think that they see that, and they know that they can mobilize voters if they can appeal to their ideologies, to their culture, to their way of life. But obviously I can't speak to anyone's personal beliefs and their own personal feelings with their own religion. But I do think that there are presidents and people in power, senators, governors, even across the world, that can truly be believers in their own religion, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, Islam, whatever, and do what they think is best. But I think that most of the time, power corrupts, and so when you're in that type of power situation, that can muddy your own morals and muddy your religious beliefs, and you start to realize that you could use it as a tool and not as a way of life, and that's when things start to get really complicated. And so trying to keep the two separate is beneficial, but keeping it separate is near impossible. When religion is a part of you, it's hard to keep it out of anything that you do in daily life, right? It's who you are. So I think it's complicated, but I think that most of the time people in power see it as a tool, which is sad. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome job. You guys have set a new bar for future ABS self-design students. So, round of applause